83-year-old Grandpa finds old family photo. When he looks closer, he gets the shock of his life. This 83-year-old man got the shock of his life last week. While cleaning out the attic, he came across an old, half-decayed box full of photos. Most of them were pictures from when he was just a little boy, but one photo stood out. It showed his mom, his dad, and himself as a baby. But there was also a young girl in the picture, and he had no idea who she was. Grandpa, 83, finds a forgotten family photo. But when he takes a closer look, everything changes. The moment he realizes who the girl might be, he starts to question everything he thought he knew about his past. Willem Van Pelt stared at the photo, stunned. Had his parents really kept something this big from him all these years? He'd always believed he was their only child. They had spoiled him and given him everything, maybe too much. Maybe it was all to hide this secret. Willem couldn't just ignore it. He had to know the truth. With both of his parents now gone, he couldn't ask them, but he wasn't ready to give up. Luckily, he still had family. Some were younger, some a bit older, and he'd always stayed close with them. Maybe someone remembered something, anything about the girl in the photo. The first person he turned to was his niece. She was 2 years older than Willem and would have been about 3 when the picture was taken. But oddly enough, she didn't recognize the girl either. "As far as I know, you've always been an only child," she said, sounding just as puzzled as he was. Now things were starting to feel even stranger. His niece Claudia had spent a lot of time around William's parents when she was younger. They even used to babysit her regularly until she hit her teens. So the fact that she'd never seen this girl before just didn't make sense. Willem started to feel like something wasn't adding up. For a moment he even wondered if Claudia was hiding something. Was there a piece of the story she was leaving out? Or had his parents hidden this girl completely? And if so, where was she now? Something about it just felt wrong, and Willem knew he had to get to the bottom of it. What he found in the end nearly brought him to tears. In the days that followed, he visited more relatives, one after another, but no one had any answers. Not a single person recognized the girl. It was like she'd been erased. Even his cousins and family friends started getting curious. Still, no one knew who she was. Willem started to think the truth would stay buried forever. He was about to give up until he realized there was one person left to ask. He made his way to his Aunt Ina's house, the last family member he hadn't spoken to. When he asked if she knew the girl in the photo, she let something slip. And with just a few words, the mystery started to unravel. Willem hadn't told her why he was visiting. He wanted it to be a surprise. The less time she has to think, the less chance she'll cover something up, he reasoned. And he was right. He parked his car, locked the door, and walked toward her front steps, feeling the nerves creep in. His heart beat a little faster as he rang the bell. When she invited him in, he said nothing at first, just sat down and quietly laid the photo on the table, pointing to the girl. Without thinking, Aunt Ina looked at it and said, "Oh, that's Olga." Her face changed instantly, like she realized too late what she had said. Her eyes widened and she covered her mouth with both hands. "How could I let that slip?" she muttered. "I stayed quiet all these years." But the truth was already out, and there was no taking it back. Who is Olga, and why is she in that photo with me and my parents? And more importantly, why doesn't anyone seem to know who she is? Willem asked, his voice steady but serious. His aunt's eyes filled with tears, and she began to cry softly. "I promised I'd never speak of this," she whispered, almost to herself. Then she looked at him and said quietly, "We only kept it from you to protect you." "Protect me?" "Protect me from what?" Willem asked, confused and a bit frustrated. "That's not something I can tell you," Ina replied gently. "I think you should leave this alone. It'll only bring pain." "But If you're really going to keep searching and my warning doesn't stop you, then you'll find what you're looking for at the regional archives here in town." Willem left her house even more confused than when he arrived. The regional archives? What could he possibly find there? She'd slipped and given him the girl's name, Olga. But now he had even more questions. He didn't blame his aunt for staying silent all these years, but he also couldn't stop now. So he headed to the archives and started digging through old records, hoping to finally learn who Olga was. But what he found about her, and himself, left him completely shaken. "Now I know my whole life wasn't what I thought it was," he would later tell the media, "and it's time I start living in the truth." Willem spent hours sorting through old records and files at the archive building. There was so much information about his family, even details he'd never heard before. He found names of relatives going back generations, his great-grandfather, grandfather, and both of his parents. Having his full family tree laid out like that gave him hope. Maybe this would finally give him the answers he'd been chasing. But as he kept reading through the documents, he only ended up with more questions than he'd started with. As he looked further down the family tree, something made him freeze. Listed under his parents' names, there should have been one child, him. But instead, there was nothing. Just their names, their date of death, and then the words, "no children." How could that be? He had always believed he was their son. Yet here it looked like, at least on paper, he never existed. Not as their child. That couldn't be right. He had to come from somewhere. So then, who was he really? He grabbed the box holding all the family tree records and dumped it out across the table in frustration. Dozens of old books and files slid out, each one holding parts of his family's past. But still no sign of his name, and no trace of the girl either. Then, just as he was about to give up, he noticed two papers sticking out from the pages of one thick book. He pulled them out, and there it was. Faint, but readable. The name he'd been chasing this whole time, Olga Pock. And right underneath her document was another name that made his heart skip a beat. Wilhelm Pock, born February 3rd, 1939, and adopted on April 18th, 1940. Wilhelm, that name. His mother had called him that a few times when he was little. He'd always thought it was just a slip of the tongue, but it wasn't. It was his real name. And he was adopted. His whole life, no one had told him, not even when he was old enough to understand. And now it was clear. Olga wasn't just some random girl in a photo. She was his sister. So who were their real parents? And where was Olga now? Big questions. But he wouldn't have to wait long for the next piece of the puzzle. Because not long after his phone rang, it was his Aunt Inga. She had clearly figured out that he had gone to the regional archives. "I'm guessing by now you figured out who the girl in the photo is, haven't you, Will?" she asked gently. Hearing her call him Will hit him differently now. He still wasn't used to hearing his old name, Wilhelm. He was quiet, waiting to see why she'd called. The old woman went on to say she'd been thinking things over. Maybe after all these years, it was finally time to tell him the full truth. She asked if he'd be willing to come by again, this time bringing all the documents he'd found. And this time, she promised. No more hiding. She would tell him everything. Willem pulled up to his aunt's house once again. This time, she was already standing at the door waiting for him. As he stepped out of the car, she gently waved him inside. Right away, she apologized for all the years of silence, but still stood by the reason. They had truly believed it was better to keep the truth hidden. Willem nodded and joined her at the kitchen table, setting the same family photo in front of her. He looked her in the eye and said, "I know now. This girl, Olga Pock, she's my sister." His aunt gave a small, sad nod. "Yes," she said softly, "and now it's time. You know the rest." She began to speak slowly, carefully. "You and your sister Olga were both adopted. You were born to a Polish family, dear friends of your adoptive parents. But when you were about a year old, your biological parents died in a tragic car crash. Judy and James, who had been close with them, stepped in to care for you. Eventually, they adopted you both. That photo you're holding, it was taken on the day you officially became part of their family. You were around 1 and Olga was 3. Willem listened carefully, still trying to process it all. But then, why don't I remember her at all, Ma? He asked, genuinely confused. Inga explained that although they had started off living together with Judy and James, it didn't last long. You were both so young, she said gently, and losing your parents hit you hard. The two of you were constantly upset, and being around each other only seemed to make things worse. No one could really explain it, but it wasn't healthy. That's why Judy and James made the painful choice to separate you. They believed you'd both have a better chance to grow up happy, even if it meant growing up apart. She paused for a moment, then looked at him with something almost like relief. But now it's time you know who Olga really is. Because the truth is, you actually know her better than you think. You've known her all your life, just not as your sister. Willem looked up, surprised. I do? I've known her? He asked, trying to piece it together. Yes, she replied, a tired but warm smile spreading across her face. In fact, from what I heard, you even spoke to her today. Willem stared at her, stunned. His eyes shifted down to the photo on the table. Nothing made sense anymore. He tried to retrace his steps. Who had he spoken to today? He'd spent hours at the regional archives. Other than the man at the front desk, he hadn't really seen or talked to anyone. He'd been alone for most of the day, except the phone call. 10 minutes, just one phone call, with her. Wait, are you saying that? Willem began, his voice trailing off. Yes, his aunt replied gently. That's exactly what I'm saying. Just like Wilhelm isn't the name you grew up with. Olga isn't hers anymore either. We gave you both new names and separate lives to protect you from everything that had happened and from the pain of your early loss. We wanted you both to have a fresh start, but we didn't want her to be completely gone from your life either. She paused, then continued. So we placed Olga with your aunt and uncle. And for the first 5 years, they stayed out of touch with Judy and James so that you both could settle into your new homes. By the time you saw each other again, neither of you remembered anything about being siblings. To you, she was just your cousin, and that's how it stayed. Over time, you became close again, as cousins. But the truth is, you've always been more than that. You now know her as Claudia. Willem sat in complete shock. Claudia? His cousin Claudia, who he saw all the time, who he talked to nearly every week, was actually his sister? His real sister? It seemed impossible. How could neither of them remember anything? He looked back at his aunt, eyes wide with emotion. Does she know? Ina shook her head slowly. No, she said softly. She's never been told. That part of the story was kept from her, just like it was from you. Maybe now's the time to change that. Maybe you should be the one to tell her. Willem felt something shift inside him. He nodded, a warm smile beginning to grow on his face. Yes, he said, I'd like that. He thanked his aunt for finally sharing the truth, then got into his car and headed straight to Claudia's house. What happened next was something truly heartwarming. He couldn't wait a second longer. As soon as Claudia opened the door, Willem told her everything. He explained the whole story, from the photo in the attic to what Aunt Ina had just shared with him. Claudia, now 85, looked at him with wide, stunned eyes. At first, she didn't say a word, then tears slowly rolled down her cheeks. After a long pause, she finally spoke. her first words as his rediscovered sister. "It might sound strange," she said quietly, "but I think I always knew. Not that I was your sister, of course, but I always felt something special between us." Claudia stood up, walked over, and gave her brother a long, tight hug. Curious how they're doing now, 1 year later. The bond between Claudia and Willem, or should we say Olga and Wilhelm, is stronger than ever. They see each other almost every single day. Willem even moved into a place just down the street from Claudia so they could spend more time together. Their connection had always felt unique, but now, knowing the truth, it's even deeper. Just last week, they celebrated their very first official brother and sister day, and it was a joy. Sure, they've known each other for decades, but now they're learning each other all over again in a whole new way. Being siblings, they realized, is something entirely different than being cousins. Thankfully, both of them are still young at heart, and they're making the most of every moment together. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves a good real-life twist. There's always time to reconnect with the people who matter most.